let's say, Paris negotiations. And in my talk, I would like to discuss, to some extent, what can we do in what I call a non-cooperative world. So you don't have to convince me that climate change is real, it's a problem, but I think we still have a long way to go to get to really good action, smart action, effective action, and that's actually what I would like to do. Economists, whenever they are confronted with a problem, they first start to say, okay, let's try to compare the costs and the benefits of making action, because there are many things where, say, for good reasons, it's better not to do anything. Okay. So I'm going to start by how much climate change is acceptable. Okay, a little bit strange question. Then try to explain you that the climate change is a world public bad. Okay. And that's a very important concept, because that will determine to a large extent, that will determine why we have to be really wary about what we are doing and really think very deep what action makes sense. And then I'll go to some more detail on international negotiations, a little bit of the theory, and come back to Paris. And then try to see what can we do, given that probably in the near future it will be difficult to reach some kind of really strong cooperation. What can we do in the meantime? Now, I don't have to convince you that future damage of climate change is real, but and very uncertain. We should not forget that it depends on past emissions. Those we know, the future emissions are still very uncertain. They can be much stronger than we expected. They can also be slower than we expected. That may be handy if we really want to avoid too much climate change. And it can make a factor 2 or 3 difference in the next 50 years. So that's something we should not forget. There's a large uncertainty on emissions. There's also a large uncertainty what is the damage of these emissions. Nicole has shown you what are the natural phenomena, what are the risks we are running. But let's say before we can really commit a lot of resources to avoid that, we need to know how large are these damages. And some of these damages, just simply a higher temperature, we can to some extent try to solve that by having better buildings, air conditioning, okay, that's it. Other things are very difficult to measure, to assess, and to know what is the cost we are ready to make in order to avoid it. These things are like biodiversity, loss of species, many other factors are really uncertain. And Nordhaus is one of the, I think, one of the big climate economists. He said that I think it's a good way to characterize what Nicole said. We are entering some kind of climate casino. So we are rolling the dice, and we don't know very well what will happen, and are really a large risk. Cost of reducing emissions, I think we know much more about the cost of reducing emissions. We know that coal is much more intensive in terms of carbon than oil and gas, so we know in what order we should try to avoid certain fossil fuels. We also know that certain types of agricultural activity have also an important effect, and that's the reason why it can be good to be vegetarian or to be veganist. No, this is not a joke, because we went to a veganist restaurant half an hour ago to just convince you that it makes sense. Now, I think most economists understand and agree, and I think that's a big change compared to maybe 10, 20 years ago, that we need really strong action. We need to take strong action. We need to take strong action in the next 40 years. If we take action, it's important to do it at the lowest cost. There are many examples where we try to do something about climate, and the way we do it is 10 times more costly than the cheapest way to avoid a ton of carbon. And we can get into big arguments here in this room. I'm sure that some people will certainly not agree with me, but in some renewable energy actions were really extremely expensive. When you try to compare them, how much CO2 it would save. I'm also not in favor of fuel efficiency policies for cars. I'm ready to explain that, and but this is not the object of my talk. So I think whenever we can do something more cheaply, we should really go for the cheapest route, and we should really think about it. Now the most important point, and this is the difficult point, and the point that is some kind of counterintuitive, is that it's a world public bad. So whenever we emit 1 ton in Belgium, or in Leuven, it will affect the whole world. So it will be diluted in the atmosphere. Don't ask me exactly how the process works, but it will be diluted around the atmosphere. Okay. So it will affect the whole world. It will have different effects in different parts of the world, but the ton we emitted will affect the whole world. On the other hand, the implication is that the climate in Belgium is beyond our control. So you say it's obvious, but it has really far-reaching implications. It means that climate change is really a pure world public bad, a world public bad where we all contribute to the problem, and we are not really controlling the quality of the atmosphere. We cannot control the climate. Now let me try to compare that with local European environmental problems. They can be solved. They are easy ones. What we try to do then is work via political negotiation. I know in Belgium it can take a long time, it's difficult, whatever, but we can compensate different parties. We can agree on common action, regulation, taxes. And whenever we have a regulation or taxes, everybody has to comply. Because there is some kind of government, can be European Commission, can be federal government, can be the Flemish government, that really says if you do not comply, if you do not reduce your emissions, you will get a sanction. And a sanction has to be, the sanction has to be in relation to the damage, has to be in relation to the probability of being detected. And I know we made some mistakes, so Dieselgate is an example of bad monitoring, insufficient sanctioning, whatever, insufficient enforcement. And that's the reason why we are successful in having European climate policies. European climate policies work. And Dr. Baker will explain that it will be a success, and that we can be proud on our European policies. Now, at world level, things are much more difficult. Okay. The reason why it is much more difficult is that it's very hard to make binding agreements. It's very hard to make binding agreements because we have no world government. No world government that can really enforce an agreement. So whenever, imagine that we have an agreement, okay, we have an agreement between 20, 30 states, 40 states. Whenever one of the states does not comply with the agreement, we promise minus 10%, we promise minus 20%. If that country does not comply with the agreement, what will happen? Yeah, they will say, yeah, you do not comply with the agreement. And there will be a committee says, yeah, you should be condemned, it's not serious, whatever. But in the end, what happens? Well, not really a lot. One of the reasons why not a lot will happen is that if one nation wants to sanction the other nation that is not doing the job, it's costly to take sanctions. And so it's not in the interest of one of the 20 countries that has signed to really take action and to really take action and impose a sanction. This means that any international agreement has to meet really very strong characteristics, very strong properties. So it's of course that whenever we have a public bad, it's good that we work together. So I will do my effort whenever the other country will also make an effort. But we can make some agreement. If we would say just we have two parties, we are two neighbors, we want to make an effort, we sign an agreement, and it go for court, and then it will be accepted. Okay, it will be sanctioned. In this case, it's not possible. We have to reach an agreement such that you will be as well off in the agreement as out of the agreement. And this has very strong effects. Imagine that we have 10 countries. The world consists of 10 countries. You have one country that starts to work with the second country, with the third country. Whenever we add a country, those who are not in the agreement, they say, very good, just taking very good action. For those countries that are, it's more and more interesting not to be in the agreement. Because the 3 or the 4 countries, they will do the job. And I will just benefit from better climate. So that's the drama of international negotiations. And you can show, or many people have shown this, that if the ideal action is something like 100, and 100 would be trying to have a maximum global warming of 2 degrees centigrade at the end of the century, that would be equal to 100 efforts. What we could count on, in theory, with international negotiations, is only something like 60 or 10. So we are expecting that it will be very hard to have sufficient efforts. Now, if we look at the Paris Agreement is of the type pledge and review. It basically means different countries make proposals, say, I commit myself to do this and that, okay? And you can check that I'm really doing that and that by checking these and these statistics. Unfortunately, this is the type of agreement that will not lead us very far. I do not want to be really negative, but I quote here some very good economist. Jean Tirole is of the Nobel Prize 2014. He's a guy that's certainly not negative. He says, okay, it will lead to very nice promises. Let's say renewed victory statements, only to prolong the waiting game. It means that it will take longer to take a really good agreement. The really good agreement we are waiting for is an agreement with much stronger sanctions. It will be an agreement that will not be complete, but we will need really strong international trade sanctions before an agreement will be able to work. And that will be one of the challenges for the future. Now, I think it doesn't matter. What can we do? Climate change policy in a non-cooperative world. Now, the EU has foreseen that the EU is a forerunner in terms of climate change, and they foreseen to be a forerunner, and they said that there will be a danger. Some industries, some firms will have to face competitors in other parts of the world that do not make the same effort, so there will be a competitive disadvantage. So there is a mechanism already that the EU has foreseen to protect, some kind of compensate this type of unfavorable type of competition. But we should not forget there is an additional handicap that I think we start to realize more and more, and it's called the green paradox. Green paradox is not difficult, but it's also important. And it certainly, it becomes very important if you have only a few parts, say only a few countries or a few big blocks that really make the effort. Green paradox can be explained in 4 steps. First step is that fossil energy can be coal, can be oil, can be gas, is largely to stop in the crack. Okay. Saudi Arabia has a lot of oil in the crack. It's a scarce resource. Most of it is a scarce resource. Not all of it is. I happen to say this. It's not all of this is a scarce resource. Whenever something is very scarce, everybody wants to have some oil because oil is very handy to have cars that are running, whatever. It will be sold way above the extraction cost. Okay. Saudi Arabia cost maybe $10 to extract. It's now sold maybe $45, $50. It used to be sold at $20. In 5 years' time, it will maybe again be $80, $90. Okay, that's the second element. Now, what happens if the EU is using less oil? Saudi Arabia will say, I have this oil in the ground. I will sell it anyway, because there's such a profit margin involved that I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to sell it anyway. That's just very simple. So what will happen is that the EU will reduce its oil use, but in the end, the total stock of cheap oil will be used. So the extreme case is that we reduce our consumption by 1 barrel of oil, and the net effect on total emissions is 0. This is a small illustration. So in theory, oil prices should go down, should go up over time. So we have actually the prices to the left-hand side. We have over time for a given expected demand. We start from price profile 1. There's a limit price, so whenever we have, let's say, a good substitute for oil, we stop at the choke price. Whenever the EU will use less oil, the price will drop from profile 1 to profile 2, and you will see in the end, we will, emissions of oil will be limited to some extent, but in the end, the total consumption of oil will not.